back, everyone. Thank you for attending. And we have our final panel with some superb speakers. We're very happy to have them with us. And I would like to, without any delay, begin my introductions so that we have time for some discussion at the end. So the name of our session is The Ethics and Justice of Ecological Consciousness, Local and Global Perspectives. We're also bringing into this perspectives from various religions, particularly minority religious traditions. And I welcome our distinguished panel. We have on our panel Elizabeth Allison from California Institute of Integral Studies, Stephanie Kaza, University of Vermont, Christopher Chapel from Loyola Marymount University, Munir Jiwa, Director of the Center for Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, and Emily Silverman, alum of the Graduate Theological Union and Vice President for Programming for American Academy of Religion, Western Region. We're going to start with Elizabeth Allison. Professor Allison is a leader in the transdisciplinary field of religion and ecology. She studies the convergence of religion and ethics with environmental policy and practice. She's Associate Professor of Ecology and Religion at the California Institute for Integral Studies. And there she has founded and also chairs the graduate program in ecology, spirituality, and religion. And she is also the convener of the Religion and Ecology Summit series of annual conferences and co-editor of After the Death of Nature, Carolyn Merchant and the Future of Human-Nature Relations. And we had an event on that at the GTU. So welcome, Dr. Allison, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rita, and thank you to you and the organizing committee for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I will share my screen. And I do also want to say that unfortunately, after my presentation, I will have to leave to return to the Religion and Ecology Summit that's happening on another screen this afternoon. So I'm sorry that I won't be able to hear all the presentations today, but I am really happy to join you for a bit. So to think about how we might reconsider the human embeddedness in the larger planetary community and how it may alter our behavior towards possibilities for just, compassionate, and ethical relations, as we were asked to do in this panel, I want to consider the response to the COVID pandemic of the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan and how it exemplifies communitarian values and care ethics that can be useful for climate and COVID resilience. I've conducted field research in Bhutan and continue to study it and keep up with events there. And it was intriguing to notice early in the pandemic, a lot of observers became really concerned about the ability of this least developed country, according to the UN, in the Eastern Himalayas. How could it address the pandemic? It doesn't have a highly technological healthcare system. It doesn't have a lot of doctors. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it didn't have any ventilators at all. And there was a lot of concern among observers of this Himalayan kingdom. More recently, a number of really celebratory articles have come out observing that there were no deaths from the COVID pandemic until January 2021. So basically a year after the pandemic broke out, there hadn't been any deaths. There's still only been one death from COVID-19 in Bhutan. And so the Atlantic said this was the unlikeliest pandemic success story. Grist said how one tiny country is beating the pandemic and climate change. And I want to consider how the response to the COVID pandemic exemplifies Bhutanese values that are based in Vajrayana Buddhism, and that parallel Bhutan's efforts to preserve the natural environment and offer clues to social and ecological resilience in the Anthropocene. So using the COVID pandemic as a sort of small case study, and then expanding into a larger set of values. And so some of the things that Bhutan did early on to address the pandemic was to really be prepared and be forward-looking in a way that the US didn't do, and to focus on prevention and detection, instituting a 21-day quarantine period for anyone found to be positive for the coronavirus. And it approached the pandemic with humility and particularly an awareness of vulnerability, noting that based on the resources that exist in Bhutan, if the pandemic got a hold, it would be very hard to eradicate. So recognizing the vulnerability inherent in this precarious situation of low technology and relatively low medical personnel. Bhutan took that vulnerability to heart in developing its response. And so one of the responses was to call on social traditions, including a tradition of what's called Disung volunteers, who are volunteers for peace in the kingdom. And these Disung volunteers spread out around the country to deliver food and supplies to people who are quarantining and to offer other sorts of support. And then one aspect of the pandemic response that might be unusual with other countries is that the monks prayed daily for the health of the Bhutanese and everyone else threatened by the pandemic. And we don't often necessarily think of prayer as part of ecological resilience response, but as one of the first person to come down with COVID in Bhutan was actually an American tourist who was treated in Bhutan and then sent home on a plane, and he survived. I believe he was in his 70s, and his American doctor said, well, whatever the Bhutanese did for you, it seems to have helped a lot. And the person who had been sick with COVID thought that maybe the prayers had helped. So we might keep an open mind about the role of prayer in the response, both to the pandemic and to larger ecological issues. And so, in case you're not familiar, Bhutan is a kingdom in the Eastern Himalayas. It's in between the Tibetan area of China and India. It's a small, extremely mountainous nation. As you can see on this topographical map, it's deeply forested. Thimphu, the capital, is circled in yellow there, and Paro, where the international airport is circled in red. They're in Western Bhutan, and much of Eastern Bhutan is small villages and farms. As I said, deeply forested. Bhutan has been committed to preserving its forests, and indeed the Constitution of Bhutan identifies the fundamental duty of every citizen to contribute to the protection of the natural environment. So right there in the Constitution, this obligation to preserve and protect the natural environment is emphasized. About half of the country is protected in parks and protected areas, which you can see in these colorful blobs on this map. And they are joined by wildlife corridors, which are the green squiggly lines connecting the colorful blobs, allowing wildlife to move between different areas. So this has been an important value that Bhutan has emphasized in its constitution, in its guiding government documents, the value of preserving the forests and protecting non-human nature in Bhutan. In my research, I found that the Vajrayana values of Bhutan contribute to this environmental protection, and I will argue in a minute, perhaps contribute to the COVID response in Bhutan. The history of Vajrayana Buddhism in Bhutan extends back to the 7th century when a Tibetan king established 2 temples in Bhutan. And about a century after that, Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche, who is known as a second Buddha in Bhutan, landed, according to legend, on this high cliff wall where he proceeded to meditate and introduce Buddhism to Bhutan. And so from that very beginning origin story, there is a connection of environment and religion in this place, Paro Taksan, which, as you can see today, has a temple, a Buddhist temple. And many of the values of Vajrayana Buddhism, as expressed in Bhutan, are harmonious with environmental protection and environmental concern, and indeed an enlarged consideration of more than human beings. In addition to these more canonical Buddhist values, the Bhutanese also identify spirits of the landscape inhabiting lakes and rivers and forest groves and mountains. And these spirits mediate the relation between humans and nature, creating places where humans make offerings and engage in a reciprocal relation with non-human nature. And so these autochthonous spirits of the landscape ground the spirituality of Buddhism in Bhutan in the landscape and connect people to the land. So some of the values that I want to emphasize that have been significant in both the pandemic response and I think can be significant in developing socio-ecological resilience in the Anthropocene are communitarian values. This Bhutanese journalist quoted here says, "I have complained about small society syndrome and how suffocating it can be, but I believe this very closeness has kept us together." So there's a mutual trust, a small society that where people know and care for one another. And this is grounded in these values of Vajrayana Buddhism in Bhutan, which understands that there's no independent existence, but rather there's interdependent co-arising based on the causes and consequences that bring everything into being. Also, all of life is mutually constitutive. There are no earthly manifestations that have any permanent or fixed existence. The Bhutanese identify the inescapability of cause and consequence, understanding that karma will always return, that each action has a consequence, and similarly that they understand through the doctrine of reincarnation that anyone may have existed previously as some other sort of being and may exist in the future as some other sort of sentient being, and therefore all sentient beings are deserving of compassion and care. These values are exemplified in this picture of the 4 faithful friends, which is widely shown around Bhutan as a model of cooperation and friendship and sharing. These values can also be seen in the 4 pillars of gross national happiness, which is the Bhutanese development paradigm, which posits sustainable and equitable economic development as just one of the 4 pillars of happiness and of the goals for Bhutan, which also include environmental conservation, preservation and promotion of culture, and good governance. These 4 domains of gross national happiness, the 4 pillars of gross national happiness are then extended into 9 domains that are studied by the Gross National Happiness Commission frequently through surveying the Bhutanese citizens to find out how they are experiencing these 9 different domains and to determine how the nation can advance its goal of gross national happiness. And I would say that these values also resonate with feminist care ethics in that they begin with a lived experience of daily life, how people are experiencing daily life. They identify relatedness as a basic characteristic of the human person and assert that close relationships are epistemologically and ontologically significant. The morality of caring is deeply grounded in relationship. And this care ethics recognizes that asymmetries of vulnerability require relational attentiveness. That certainly in the pandemic, recognizing that some people were more vulnerable required providing food, sending out the desung volunteers to deliver food and other goods that people needed to manage their quarantine. And this care work is the concrete work of maintenance, according to the feminist ethicist De La Bella Casa. And maintenance into the Anthropocene, caring for our world into the Anthropocene is what we need to do to maintain social and ecological resilience. Similarly, that in international relations, the care ethicist Fiona Robinson has noted that abstract theories are too general to motivate action on international relations. And she also calls for a care ethic at an international level. So as climate and the pandemic are both international issues that transcend global boundaries, that transcend boundaries between humans and non-humans, this all calls for rethinking values toward COVID and climate resilience. And so here I've emphasized in Bhutan's approach, approaching the problem with a humility and vulnerability. Bhutan, as a small nation in the steep Himalayas, is very vulnerable to climate change. Those mountains are warming faster than much of the rest of the world. There's a vulnerability to landslides and glacial lake outburst floods and unpredictable weather. And so beginning with that recognition of vulnerability requires investigating, the relation of the situation and the availability of tools for dealing with it. Bhutan really built on its social and religious tools to address the pandemic, emphasizing caring, emphasizing relationships and mutual aid, sending out these volunteers, even bringing in the prayer of the monks. There's an emphasis here on collective action, on including everyone in the response to both the pandemic and to climate change, and extending care to non-human beings. These place economic values into a larger context, such that economic values, rather than being the whole context in which society happens, economic values are only one portion of the overall goal of a society and the context. And so the Vajrayana Buddhist values that I've mentioned, together with the landscape and protector deities, place human communities and ecological communities into a larger relationship with the ecosphere, where economy is subservient to larger collective values of ecology and of eco-social resilience. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. You know, the quote you had about small society symptom, it's incredible, but what we know is that the most optimal society is actually about 150 people. So Bhutan's success story is something that we don't take into account enough. And thank you so much for your work on that. It really means so much to have these alternate forms of vision for us to consider. I'd like to now invite Dr. Stephanie Kaza, University of Vermont. Dr. Kaza is Professor Emerita of Environmental Studies at the University of Vermont and former director of the Environmental Program. She co-founded the Environmental Council at the University of Vermont and a campus-wide consortium on sustainability, and was faculty director of the UVM Sustainability Faculty Fellows Program, and has served on the executive councils of the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences and the National Council of Environmental Deans and Directors. The title of her presentation is Buddhist Practice in the Age of Climate Crisis. Welcome, Dr. Kaza.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. And let me just bring up my screen right away, if you have me there. And we'll get started. So I will begin just by saying that there's so much to bite off here with climate and pandemic, that from a Buddhist perspective, it's simply what we have to operate with right now. It may appear to be a crisis, but I will argue that it is a place of practice, and that a practice approach is a grounded and viable way to work with the pandemic as well as climate change. So part of what we're feeling right now is the tremendous calls for action across the globe. These have been spoken about across today. I'm sure this is a scene from my own city right now, Portland, Oregon, that we're operating in a new normal. So we sometimes think that the old ethics aren't enough, and that we are constantly having to think at a global level with these unrelenting protests against injustice. Even right now, we're mourning the loss of the Asian American women. So in the meantime, of course, carbon emissions continue to rise. So we just, of course, need to realize that environmental and economic suffering has reached all corners of the earth, and we're united in that. And furthermore, there's hardly any life support system that isn't under siege. So I mention these as our background, our common challenge, because the patterns are so widespread and so recognizable: systemic patterns of domination, wealth inequity, unstable markets, and threats that are multiplying one from another and amplifying as well, not to mention inadequate leadership. So everywhere people are struggling with rapid change in an uncertain future. This is something we all hold in common. So I'm going to offer some of the basic teachings and practices common to all Buddhist traditions, though I will say my own background is in Soto Zen, and most of my writing and research has been on Buddhist environmental thought, trying to draw from the commonalities of the Buddhist traditions. So the basic moral guidelines give us a wonderful place to start in a practice path because they're based in non-harming, and that can pertain to global health or to carbon emissions. It's pretty hard not to find a way that non-harming will work in any given ethically challenging situation. The central law of interdependence, which Elizabeth mentioned, includes an understanding of causation as multiply causal. The idea of single cause and effect is anathema to Buddhist understanding of a relational worldview. But the project in Buddhism is liberation from suffering. That's the religious and spiritual project, to understand how much all of our human and really the lives of all sentient beings are marked by suffering of sickness, old age, death, and so on. But through insight and realization and practice, there is a path to liberation. So many of the Buddhist practices strengthen intention and an orientation to a practice path and a compassion. So this practice path approach is the grounded place that I think about climate, and I think about pandemic and all the other ills facing us, the terrible injustices. So what do we mean by a practice path approach? I don't mean becoming a monastic per se. A practice path approach can be used in any context, but at fundamental level, it means orienting towards the well-being for all. And in the Mahayana tradition, that's represented by the Bodhisattva vow, to keep returning to this earth as often as it takes, or as many lifetimes, or as much effort to serve all beings until they're all free from suffering. It also means understanding our actions in a relational framework, not thinking only of myself, but understanding the other as self. And it means starting right from where we are, no matter how much suffering is there. In the middle of this pandemic, this is the place where we are. It's the only place to practice right now. We start there, affirm our intentions, and move forward from there. And underlying the practice path are a set of ethical guidelines. And this is what I believe can help guide us through the very murky territory we're right in the middle of here with these multiple crises. So let's say a little bit more about cultivating relational thinking. I like to think of this as drawing on a systems perspective. And I learned a lot of this from one of my main teachers, Joanna Macy, who studied systems theory. But of course, I apply it in my environmental thinking. And pretty much all environmental science and social science these days is grounded in a systems approach, trying to understand whatever the situation is from as many different perspectives as possible, understanding the multiple causes and conditions that are contributing to what we are seeing right now. So human life itself is relational from the get-go, from the parental relations, the family relations, the community relations, and then I would say the environmental relations. Who is in that community, which trees, which pets, which neighbors, always emphasizing the relational aspect rather than the egotistical or self-oriented aspect. And understanding that this is incredibly dynamic, that things are emerging and disintegrating, passing away and arising all the time, and that every being is affecting and being affected by others. So this calls for a kind of mindful alertness to understand how complex that is and how much might be impinging on this pandemic, on this climate crisis, on our injustice. So some of the phrases you hear frequently are codependent or interdependent arising. Thich Nhat Hanh uses the word interbeing. Joanna Macy uses the phrase mutual causality. And the most classic term may be the law of interdependence, a sense that this is the rock bottom of a shaping force from a Buddhist perspective, perhaps more powerful than gravity. Now, when we start to look at ethical practice, the foundation of it, as I said, is non-harming. And a way to translate that is, in a practice form, is compassionate protection of life, of human life, of plant life, of animal life, of mountain life, of river life, of cosmic life. So we protect ourselves in order not to harm others. This is like wearing our masks these days. And of course, we like that as an ethical message. And protecting the earth community. And in terms of community, I mean those relationships. These days, the mycelial networks are of particular interest to me, as they underpin almost all living ecosystems in a way that is so much more vast than we ever comprehended. But also it's coming to light now that protecting life means we cannot rest in our judgments and our ideologies. They have caused tremendous harm in the realms of racial and gender injustice, and still are. This is a place that requires so much attention right now. The opinions, the tweeting, the commentaries are so harmful. So looking closely at what's actually causing harm. Inevitably, all ethical practice means choosing how to act with restraint. What will you not do in order to not cause harm, based on your awareness of others? And at rock bottom, that compassion often looks like ways to practice kindness. I want to emphasize choosing less and choosing enough, because this is one of the great legacies of the monastic practice of Buddhism. To be able to live very simply, very lightly, maybe asking for alms for your own food, or wearing only a monastic robe, but understanding that every single human action you take affects many others and leans on many others. So the more lightly we can live on the land, the less harm will be done to that land. This picture, by the way, is the organic garden at Green Gulch Zen Center. And I always appreciate that it's blessed by one of the many bodhisattvas, a sort of mother Buddha in there. So being able to choose that kind of restraint as an ethical practice is much easier if it's grounded in gratitude and an understanding of what is truly nourishing, not so much the overwhelming options in the consumer world, but what is truly nourishing to the spirit. I give you an example here just of the Upaya Zen Center meal verse. They say before each meal, earth, air, water, fire, and space combine to make this food. Numberless beings give their life and labor that we may eat. May we be nourished, that we may nourish life. So in the Zen tradition, and also in the Theravada traditions and the Vajrayana traditions, one takes vows at some point when you're serious enough about the practice path and have gone beyond that beginner stage. And by taking vows, you agree to do your best to live by those vows and keep them forefront. The panel on the right is Han that's outside one of the Zen centers that gets, you see every day as you go into the meditation hall. And these vows are a vow to keep practicing, to wake the beings of the world, to set endless heartache to rest and live the Buddha way. But the 5 classic vows that can be drawn on thinking about global health or the climate crisis or injustice are listed here. Not harming is the restraint way to express it, and cultivating compassionate protection is the proactive way to express it. Not taking what is not given or not stealing means cultivating generosity, living simply in order to be able to be more generous. Not participating in abusive relations traditionally has meant sexual relations, but in our context today, it means abusive relations with the planet, with the atmosphere, with people of all different races, genders, identities, etc. A much broader sense of don't be abusive in any way you can avoid. Instead, practice respect and love. Not speaking falsely. This is, of course, very critical now when we have such a climate of denial and misinformation, and it's difficult to find your way through. So this practice alone can be very powerful with the crises we face today. Cultivating deep listening and truthful speech. And the last one, not using intoxicating substances or behaviors. And self-righteousness can be one of those intoxicating behaviors. So it calls us to check where our delusions have really caught us up and we're not seeing clearly anymore. This is about discernment and clarity. So the point of this practice path is that ethical people will create an ethical society, and vice versa, in a mutually emergent way, an ethical society will help create ethical people. This can be a compass point, something to aim for. So let me just mention a few of the skillful means in that direction to support ethical practice and how that might be applied. One of my favorite terms in Sanskrit and Buddhist philosophy is upaya, or skillful means, which means to be able to be flexible and brightly intelligent and alert about what will be the most appropriate method in a given situation to relieve suffering or to share the teachings, so that you will be the most skillful teacher in a setting. And that is said to be the heart of compassionate response, because it's based on what is actually needed and what can actually be received. It's not a prescriptive set of advice or policies. It's a responsive, active, alive in that moment. The other part of this is staying grounded enough in a space of equanimity and stability to be able to be effective. Of course, meditating is one way to do that, but there are plenty of other ways to stay centered and grounded. That has been very difficult in this last year. I just want to acknowledge how challenging it has been with the news coming every single day and the pandemic on the rise. Most of us have been so anxious that it's been hard to keep our feet on the ground. So this is something to begin to reclaim as people are vaccinated and we learn more and we're working together across the globe to help everybody. Grounded presence generates right out of that equanimity, and I appreciate Thich Nhat Hanh's view of mindfulness as medicine, not simply as a way to be more aware in your senses for your personal pleasure, but as a way to offer medicine for the suffering of the world. And right now, we especially need it to mitigate chaos. There is a tremendous amount of chaos around the climate crisis, the injustice, the pandemic. So every moment of calmness, you can imagine that bell ringing, is a piece of medicine to offer into the situation. And that this practicing of mindfulness will build capacity and calmness as we approach difficulty. This is why I'm calling for a practice path, because the more we do this, the more prepared we will be for whatever next arises. But a particular spin I want to leave you with is the option of seeking green wisdom. Green wisdom, I believe you can find from trees in particular, some of my favorite mentors, but also places, plants, animals, whatever is speaking strongly to you and can offer guidance and support. That these teachings are everywhere and paths to them have been laid down before us by Indigenous people and Buddhists and many, many others. So going for that wild mind, trying to find the original face of life arising. Well, just for a couple of last slides here, what have Buddhists done to address climate change and eco-destruction? Well, mostly we have worked with other denominations, particularly in the West. Buddhism is not a dominant religion, although many, many people are very interested in it. So where Buddhists can work as allies, partners in interfaith initiatives is where they're most effective, say with interfaith power and light work or with climate marches. I've recently done climate trainings for Zen Center affiliates and sanghas as a way to spread some of these messages and systems approach to understanding climate change and climate justice. There's been some amount of activism and sustainability, which I always applaud. Here's a couple of centers with solar panels, Tassajara Zen Center, and also Zen Mountain Monastery in New York. That requires a certain stability financially and number of members. Buddhist Peace Fellowship has done a lot to work on their program Block Build B, and there's now more and more eco-dharma retreats. But here's a slogan you might take with you: the whole earth is my true body. A Thich Nhat Hanh saying, I vow to work for climate justice. So there's certainly plenty more to do. Buddhists are challenged as much as anybody else by a divisive culture, by isolation under the pandemic and loneliness and a sense of being separated, and lack of national coordination. Happily, that's improved quite a bit in the last few months. But as policy influencers, we probably are not as strong as some other of our interfaith partners. So what we can do is keep talking. And I'm very heartened myself that one of the silver linings of the pandemic year has been this superb proliferation of online Buddhism. There are Dharma talks every hour of the day from all kinds of different centers. There's courses, there's amazing books out on racism, a recent one called Black and Buddhist, books like mine on green Buddhism. It's a really beautiful flowering of Buddhism in response to these challenges. So much more is needed, of course, more interfaith work, more leadership, more responsiveness. But I believe together, working with others as small B Buddhists, we can help to end climate silence and also these other injustices as silence. So let me stop there. There's more yet to come. And I'm really grateful to be able to be part of this piece of the seminar, though I, like Elizabeth, had another conflict for the second half of this. So I will have to leave you relatively soon too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaza. And anyone in the audience who wishes to send her a question, do it quickly, because she has, as she told you, another event to go to. And we're so grateful that she could join us for this. I just want to say that when you put it in these clear terms, I mean, it just becomes a sense of practice, right? So this is a form of eco-praxis from a Buddhist perspective. Eco-praxis then becomes a form of meditation. It's a contemplative act. So when you have as many, centers like the Green Gulch Center, which you had photographs of, and other centers of Buddhist Peace Fellowship and so forth, why do you think that there's not as much involvement by American Buddhists in an attempt to help shape policy? Because there is so much work being done.
I think my answer to that is that it's hidden under the guise of small B Buddhist. There's no big advantage to claiming yourself as a Buddhist because it'll put you higher up on the hiring list with President Joe Biden. But if in your own practice you have that kind of commitment and intention to an ethical life, which I do see, meditation and mindfulness have become so popular in the workplace and in the family. There's wonderful ways to teach children now about this. I think it's become a new flavor that people have really appreciated. So I'm hoping very much this makes for a saner, more careful workplace where people are kinder to each other and more able to think and able to generate good policies. But I know there are Buddhists there in academia, in government, in city governments, state governments. They just don't need to proclaim it. And that's appropriate, because that would just accentuate the ego side, and much better for them to see their lives as public servants in a relational web where they're serving each other.
Thank you so much. I would like to now call on Professor Christopher Key Chapple. Dr. Chapple is the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology and founding director of the Master of Arts program in Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in LA. He's a specialist in the religions of India and has published more than 20 books, including the recent wonderful, I recommend it highly, Living the Landscapes, Meditations on the Elements, the 5 Elements in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain yogas. He serves as advisor to multiple organizations, including the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, the Ahimsa Center at Pomona College, and the Dharma Academy of North America, where he is chair of the steering committee, as well as the Jain Studies Center at SOAS in London. He has edited with Mary Evelyn Tucker 2 books out of the series in Religions of the World and Ecology. One of them is Hinduism and Ecology, the intersection of earth, sky, and water, and Buddhism and Ecology, the intersection of dharma and deeds. The title of his presentation is Alternative Eco-Communities in India. Chris, take it away.
Okay. Thank you for your patience here. And what I would like to do is to begin by just showing some images from the book that Rita mentioned, and then tie that into stories of 3 communities that are actually described in the book itself. So I wanted to, first of all, do a land acknowledgement. I'm here in Los Angeles, and this is an area that was settled by the Tongva peoples some 1,000 years ago, who were originally Shoshone from Wyoming. And then, of course, Cabrillo sailed by about 500 years ago, just kept on going, and another 250 years went by before the folks came up from Mexico City. And then about 170 years ago, the Americans began to just take over this part of the planet. But I do want to also acknowledge my own teacher, her family originally from Assam in eastern India. Now, Mother Earth, here she is. And as we gaze upon this image created by one of my graduate students, we see the Himalayas in the background. We see flowers, we see the heavenly bodies of moon and sun. We see an invocation in this image by the same artist, Gabriela Ayala Canizales, who lives now in Seattle. We see this invocation of the earth with the fungus, with the trees, with the wheat, and again with the mountains. An invocation of water, including images of the shells that find a home in the water, droplets of rain, as well as waves of the ocean, invoked by the Bija Mantra 1. We see fire, the hands aflame, stars and facets reflecting brilliance and warmth throughout the world. Again, the Bija Mantra Ram. We take flight with the air with each and every breath. We occupy space, we dance within space. And we need to learn to step more lightly in space. And then finally, as we've heard earlier, we live in continuity with our animal kin. Now, as I reflect on the communities with which I would like to share about, I'm going to start with an eco ashram on the outskirts of Dehradun, established by MC Mehta. MC Mehta, winner of the Goldman Prize for his work to disaggregate heavy industry from its proximity to the Taj Mahal in Agra, India, went again and again and again in front of the Supreme Court of India and achieved great victories. Not only did he help slow the deterioration of the Taj Mahal, on April 1st, 2001, his advocacy allowed for a remarkable change in the air quality of Delhi. And this innovation required the closing down of all kerosene-based fuels that were up to that point used to power the auto rickshaws, and they switched to CNG. And I happened to be there that very day, and it was remarkable to see the disappearance of these thick curtains of black soot that just simply were no more. Now, we know that the air quality remains very bad, particularly in Delhi, for a whole bunch of complex reasons, but this was a great abiding achievement that's now been replicated in other areas of India. And the Ford Foundation came to MC Mehta and said, train other people. And with some private donations, the acquisition of some land, as I said, near Dehradun, he now conducts residential retreats. When I attended, funded, as I mentioned, by the Ford Foundation, with legal experts and political persons from all the countries of South Asia, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from Bhutan, from Nepal, from Sri Lanka, from India. They all gather. And how does he teach them? He tells them the stories. He tells them the stories of the incredible suffering inflicted on everyday Indian people by polluting industrial practices. And with this knowledge, they are then able to go forward and work toward implementing the sort of legislation that he is implementing. So that's on a policy governmental level, a judicial level in the north. And I'm going to go down to the south. And there's a small ashram called Fireflies Ashram. And I've, as with these other places, all of these places, I've brought students and we've taken up residence there for several days at a time. In this particular ashram on the outskirts of Bangalore, Bengaluru, as it's now called, saw a wisdom in celebrating sculpture, celebrating art, celebrating music, as well as going forward with community education. And I love how Rita has titled this Global and Local, and this is a very local issue, particular to India. And they were one of the very first organizations to bring attention to the pollution caused by ritual performance. And in India, particularly in the month of October, it's one festival after another festival after another festival. And it quite often includes processions through the streets and temporary, I'm thinking of Devashish Banerjee is actually presented on this. They create these magnificent displays of the goddess. The problem is that the paints that are used are highly toxic. So what they modeled first down at Firefly's ashram was specialized immersion rituals, so that rather than taking this created art and, as has been done for hundreds of years, immersing it in the river or taking it to the ocean or to a lake, what they do now is that they have special disaggregating portable ponds that then can be filtered before, the water can be filtered before it is returned again to the earth or to other flowing water. So it's a very particular and extremely important ecological innovation now India-wide. Then the third organization, and again, I don't want to take too much time, we saw the images earlier of the goddess. And Munir Jiva, the advocate for organics throughout India, her workshops have reached maybe 50 to perhaps 100 million farmers in India. She's seeking a return to traditional millet as a base for diet. And she's seeking the setting aside of the trap of pesticides and herbicides and artificial fertilizers that bind the farmers not only to poisoning the soil, but also to going into debt inflicted by these multinational global corporations that have preyed upon the 500 million farmers of India. So her work is such that you take up residence in what used to be the family home. And when we were there for many, many days, we learned 7 different types of composting. We learned how to cook very incredibly delicious foods. And I remember particularly spending several hours with my students cleansing turmeric and preparing it for market. So I just wanted to lift up those 3 very different examples of local initiatives. 1, governmental. 2, cleaning up ritual behavior. And 3, being attentive to agriculture. And with this ground, we can move forward. And I'll end with appreciation. She's now gone, but for Stephanie listing out those 5 elements. And those 5 elements are what we have. These 5 elements are all we have. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful, informative, and I have so many questions, and I'll get you on that later. I'd like to now invite Dr. Munir Jiwa. He's the director of the Center for Islamic Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, my colleague and my neighbor across the street, across the hall in the GTU. Munir Jiva is the founding director of the Center for Islamic Studies, as well as associate professor of Islamic Studies and core doctoral faculty at GTU, and a visiting scholar at the Institutions and Governance program at UC Berkeley. His research interests include Islam and Muslims in the West, media, aesthetics, critical theory, decolonialism, decolonization theories, secularism, and religious formation. He is the recipient of many awards and grants from Andrew Mellon Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, and various others. He serves on the Islamic Advisory Group for Public Education at Stanford University. And very importantly, he received the GTU Excellence in Teaching Award in 2015, the year I came, and the GTU Distinguished Faculty Award in 2019. Please welcome Dr. Jiwa. His presentation is titled COVID-19, Precarious Life and Our Interconnectedness. Munir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Salam and greetings of peace. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to Dr. Rita Sharma for your incredible work in putting this conference together and your friendship over the years, which has been sustaining for me. And also to Dr. Devin Zuber and Matt for your work. It's incredible work in keeping us all informed and together. I know what this takes behind the scenes, so I want to just acknowledge and appreciate you. And to you all for these really remarkable, powerful, and inspiring presentations and reflections, and the incredible questions we've been receiving from participants. So thank you all. Just as I've been reflecting, I'm especially grateful also to Dr. Miles Tribble for your inspiring presentation, and especially on the arc of justice and how responsibility rests with us. That really just, of course, keeps resonating. And Dr. Mo Lobita on climate debt and reparations. Your book is incredible, and I have to think about these things more. But also two other terms you mentioned together on beauty and brutality. And so I think some of my presentation brings these things together as well. In this time of heightened uncertainty, our precariousness and fragility can find comfort and hope in our interconnectedness and interdependency. We are finding new ways of remaining together apart and online. The unprecedented, and I say this because of the technological sort of context that we're in, the unprecedented and devastating spread of the deadly coronavirus, COVID-19, has created new ways of collective being, an altered sense of time, space, and place, and different rhythms of life that beat back and forth, fast and slow, with different intensities and emotions. Amid the myriad of rules and regulations to which we continue to adapt, we share new vocabularies, new bodily, social, and spatial practices that are global, even as they are experienced in different ways locally. Our rituals of everyday life have changed. We shelter in place, we stay at home, self-isolate, quarantine, practice social and physical distancing in hopes of saving lives and flattening the curve. We realign and learn how to manage these new ways of being with ourselves, our families, our communities, our work, with other creatures, with the environment, online and in the world. We ask with more urgency and reflection about who matters, what matters, who is considered essential, what is considered essential. We are heartbroken to know so many people who are continuing to be hospitalized, and loved ones who can't visit them, or of the elderly, especially in care homes, who might feel isolated, or those who cannot bury their loved ones who have died. We witness the heroes on the front lines who risk their lives, from healthcare workers who attempt to save lives to countless others who make everyday life possible, who feed, house, and comfort others, who transport and deliver goods, and those who keep us safe. As we navigate this pandemic, let us center our interconnectedness by finding ways to serve others and by attending to the inequities, local and global. As we continue to practice self-care, let us also remember and care for the most vulnerable amongst us with justice, patience, empathy, love, generosity, compassion, and kindness. As many of the privileged have experienced vulnerabilities in new ways, they might express their fears of ill health or mortality by referring to this pandemic as the great equalizer or leveler. But the poor and vulnerable, often people of color, remind us that though we are equal before God, we are not always treated so by each other. Refugees, immigrants, victims of ongoing wars and violence, the displaced, the orphans, the undocumented, the homeless, the unemployed, the hungry, the abused, these people tell different stories, often unheard. We have to contend with the urgency of our moment, the great loss of human life, and the pandemic politics and privilege, various media and online platforms, with the enduring questions of rights, responsibilities, and justice. While COVID-19 has our rare global attention, it also reminds us that it cares little about who is inflicted and affected. Yet, we also have a rare global life-affirming moment to think more about our shared humanity, the environment that begs us to change our destructive ways, and to address and heal the inequalities, inequities, and injustices that stare us in the face. I want to share with you some of the thoughts that have come out of our class that I've been co-teaching with Dr. Mahjabeen Dalla this semester, called COVID-19 and Precarious Life. And again, I challenge the idea of the pandemic as a great equalizer and focus on how COVID-19 has revealed and often intensified racism, global inequalities, inequities, and injustices, from food and housing insecurity to lack of access to healthcare and medications, school and education. We will look at, we tried to do in this course, we tried to look at how the pandemic has disproportionately affected Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other vulnerable communities. And I ask, and perhaps we all can reflect on this, is what does it mean to think about the precarious life and pandemic politics during this past year, especially during the US presidential election, and ongoing white supremacy and systemic racism? And how can we draw on the positive role of families, communities, and religions in providing care and hope? The pandemic provides a portal for us to think in new ways. We have thought, for example, in this course about racism and injustice and inequities, those who have been blaming Black people for dying of coronavirus, Ibrahim Kendi's amazing piece. We have thought about the kind of feminism and feminist arguments that are being brought forward, especially about unmasking the racial politics of the coronavirus pandemic and Islamophobia. We're looking at fueling of anti-Asian racism and xenophobia worldwide, the impact of the coronavirus on disabled people, and the mistakes and the struggles behind America's coronavirus tragedy. In the area of public health, we look at nursing homes and patients who are dying of loneliness, and how COVID-19 punishes Latinx communities for hard work and larger and extended intergenerational families. We look at how first coronavirus vaccine doses administered in hard-hit Indigenous communities, and we're starting to grapple with questions around vaccine nationalism. And yet, we have to think about our health beyond national borders. We have to think in new ways about time. The artist Ai Weiwei in his book Human Flow and Humanity and his newest film Corona Nation have helped us think about this. What about those who are imprisoned? We have to think about those whose families have been separated, whether at the borders or beyond, child family separation. What about immigrant rights? We have been punishing extended families for living together, and yet there's a need throughout this pandemic that we've realized just how lonely many people are. In the field of education and technology, we look at how the humanities have become essential services, one argues. 59% of US parents with lower income say their children face digital obstacles in schoolwork. As schools have been closed due to the coronavirus, some US students face digital homework gap. Others have looked at how the pandemic's disruption shows how much academia could learn from the disability community. There's also issues that we need to think about in terms of COVID-19 and the surveillance tech technology data gathering and privacy issues and the global inequities and inequalities around the technological advances on the one hand, and what they do in terms of privacy and further inequities. And we've seen this in even things like contact tracing. In the areas of religion, spirituality, chaplaincy, spiritual care, we look at how many have said that during coronavirus, their strength has, religious faith has strengthened. And of course, there are different ways to read these data. People might just be, getting online more in ways that they weren't able to do before. So there's different ways in which to think about what this means. But chaplains are toiling on the front lines. Burials have been very hard across many communities, faith communities and beyond. And religious leaders have had to attend to a lot of this work when families have been isolated, and haven't been able to bury their loved ones. And we've looked at the art and kind of aesthetics and creative expressions that have come out of this, but also as a response to the virus, right? African artists taking creative approaches to fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, as we look at their works, we realize the global inequities even in the art worlds. Amanda Gorman's poetry has shown why spoken word belongs in schools, and we've been inspired by her and many, many, many others who are bringing their poetry to the fore and helping us unite. So the place of the arts is extremely important in this. I want to turn now to the moral mandate and ethical imperative found in the Islamic tradition on questions of justice, equity, and care. I draw on the remarkable work of Ibrahim Abdul-Mateen's book, Green Deen, and what Islam teaches about protecting the planet. So deen in Islam, deen is often translated as religion, but it's not. It's like religion, as we know, does not translate across traditions in the same way. So the word religion itself is not the same term that people use for their own traditions. So Islam is, in fact, we think of it as deen, as a way of life, right? And not just something that's done parts of parts of the week or year. It's a way of life. So it's an inculcation of a way of life. And included in that is our questions of diversity, justice, equity, and care. So Islam, if we understand Islam through the hadith or the sayings and actions of the sunnah of the Prophet, the hadith of Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, is really important. It states that ihsan is to worship God as though you see God, and if you cannot see God, then indeed God sees you. Ihsan is to do beautiful things. And it's the things that, ihsan is something that Muslims strive to after first attending to Islam and Iman. So Islam as the surrender to God, Iman as a way of deepening the faith. So Islam is what one should do, Iman is why one should do those things. And it is to help one inculcate this sense of doing what is beautiful, ihsan. Right, so it's the striving towards ihsan, and the striving towards ihsan is also sort of done through living your faith, living the principles of your faith, living out Islamic law through the principles, or what is called the maqasid, sharia, to live out the goals or objectives of legal doctrine in Islam for the greater good through these principles that are of what we've called the common good, or for the welfare or public interest of all, right? And Muslims live by these principles, and they guide how we interact with each other and with the environment and with the otherworldly. In his book, Green Deen, Ibrahim Abdul-Mateen looks at 6 principles that he draws on from the work of Faraz Khan as they apply to our relationship to the environment. He says, these principles are the rubric upon which I am determining what constitutes a green deen, that is, living and practicing Islam while also honoring the environmental ethos of Islam. And he mentions these 6: understanding the oneness of God and his creation, Tawheed; seeing the signs of God, ayat, everywhere; being a steward, Khalifa, on the earth; honoring the covenant or trust we have with God, amana, to be protectors of the planet; moving towards justice, adl or adala; living in balance with nature, mizan. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, declared, "The world is beautiful and verdant, and verily God, be he exalted, has made you his stewards in it, and God sees how you equate yourselves." And there's a Quranic verse, I think that's also important here to mention. It's, "Corruption has appeared on the land and in the sea because of what the hands of humans have wrought. This is in order that we give them a taste of the consequence of their misdeeds, that perhaps they will turn to the path of right guidance." Imam Zaid Shakir observes of this verse, "The earliest commentators on the Quran have described this corruption as the drying up of the rains, the disappearance of the harvest of the sea, and other ecologically relevant meanings." Living in balance with nature, as again, I draw on the work of Ibrahim Abdul Mateen. He says, "Everything in creation is made to exist in a perfect balance. Seeing the earth as a mosque, meaning respecting this balance, thinking of the sun and the moon, which gives us the night and day. For thousands of years, we've been able to use this balanced system to raise our crops and to know when to sleep, work, and pray." The Quranic verse on this is, "God has created us. He has taught us speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow course exactly computed, and the herbs and the trees both alike bow in adoration. And the firmament has he raised high, and God has set up the balance of justice, in order that you may not transgress due balance. So establish weight with justice, and fall not short in the balance. And it is God who has spread out the earth for God's creatures." To manifest a green deen, we need to begin, as our Prophet Muhammad did, instructed us by healing our hearts. Abdul Mateen says, "We can heal through prayer, and we can heal the planet through prayer, not just in the spiritual sense, but also by becoming more open to living a life in concert with all of creation. The way we treat the planet is a reflection of how we treat ourselves, and the way we treat ourselves is a reflection of how we treat our planet." I just want to reflect here in the brief few minutes that I have, and I've been inspired by, hearing other presentations today. So I've just added this, and I just want to share personally how prayer, all the 5 pillars in Islam, and I'm just drawing on prayer here, brings together this really important piece around relationships, right? So first, the sort of ritual prayer that we do in Islam, the 5 daily prayers, are marked by the sun, but the calendar in Islam is a lunar one, right? So there's already a relationship to the sun and moon in the marking of time. Then there's the ablution, the cleansing or the purifying of ourselves before we begin prayer. And the intention. In the Islamic tradition, actions are but by intention. And then we turn ourselves, the Qibla, orientation towards Mecca, and then we hear the call to prayer, to bring ourselves from our individual selves to meet in community with others, shoulder to shoulder, as a sign of equality and our interconnectedness. The earth as masjid, the earth as a mosque, in the literal and symbolic sense, is really important. And I say this because the term masjid, which refers to mosque in the physical sense, but also masjid comes from the related word is sujud, and the root is sajada, which is to prostrate oneself, to bow down, right? And so if you think of the entire entire earth as masjid, as a place of prostration, then the entire world is sacred. And if the entire world is sacred, then our relationship to it and everything in it and beyond it must have that kind of relationship as well. It calls us to be sacred in all spaces, in all times, and with all people and all creatures, here worldly and otherworldly. So I think that's a really important point about the earth, the entire earth as masjid, as a place of prostration. And in it, we when we go into prostration in the Islamic tradition, we say, glory be to God, the Most High, Subhana Rabbi al-Ala. The next part of prayer is the grounding and disciplining. The prayer itself, the physical aspect of it, for those who can, humbles us both in, so it's a these are the sort of mandatory 5 canonical prayers every day. They humble us both in content and in its physicality of prostrating ourselves. It has an impact on us physically, but also it's a healthy exercise. So there's a whole sort of embodiment of prayer, but also the senses, hearing and reciting as connected to various states of being. And the content of the prayer itself is to make a connection to those who have come before us. Our prayers are on, we ask for blessings on Muhammad and his family and descendants as we ask for blessings on Abraham and his descendants. So our prayer also establishes the kind of lineage, at least to the monotheistic traditions, right? There's a prayer within that is often recited on my Lord, make me an establisher of prayer, and many from my descendants. Our Lord, accept our supplications. Our Lord, please forgive us and our parents and the believers the day of the count, when the day of account is established. And then we end the prayer with wishing everyone peace. And we often look to the right and the left, and it's wishing the angels on the right and left with peace as a connection, again, of the here worldly and the multiple relations we have, but also a relationship to the seen and the unseen, and a connection with the otherworldly, right? So, and the Quranic verse on this is, he has the keys to the unseen. No one knows them but God. God knows all that is in the land and sea. No leaf falls without God's knowledge, nor is there a single grain in the darkness of the earth or anything, fresh or withered, that is not written in a clear record. There are many more things. I think in the interest of time, I'll sort of jump to those. For anyone who wants to contact me after, I'm happy to share with you the verses that I had also I had put together here on justice and equity from the Quran and the prophetic tradition. But one that sort of stands out is from the Quran. It says, verily God does not even an atom's weight of injustice. Does not do even an atom's weight of injustice. And in the prophetic tradition, Prophet Muhammad said, "O my servants, I have forbidden injustice upon myself and have made it forbidden amongst you, so do not commit injustice." As we prepare just in a few weeks for the month of Ramadan, and as the month of Ramadan begins, so many of us have had to reconcile again this year and have had to accept that we will not be able to physically attend the mosque this Ramadan, standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer, or break our fast together, a time when many make extra efforts of coming to the mosque to experience the love and beauty of this sacred time and community. We continue to keep in our hearts those who cannot practice their faith freely. But there's also so much hope in knowing that we are united in our efforts of fulfilling our religious obligations with a renewed sense of commitment, continuity, and purpose. Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, is a month in which the Quran was revealed to our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a month of fasting from dawn to sunset each day, of intensive prayers, of reading the Quran, and of striving to be in constant state of God consciousness, a month of mercy, forgiveness, and emancipation. It is the month in which we reflect and struggle to center ourselves, offer our gratitude, to practice charity, and to be especially mindful of and connected to those in need. I want to end with just a short prayer. May we flatten the curve of inequality, inequity, and injustice, and may we shelter in God as we shelter in place. And my prayers for everyone's good health, unity, peace, and safety. And I just end with a Quranic verse that is a very beautiful one, that says, verily with every hardship comes ease. Verily with every hardship comes ease. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to particularly thank you for that beautiful conception on the entire world as masjid, which sanctifies the world. I hope you do some, I hope you publish that, because that's fun. And if you do, I'd love it to be in one of our edited volumes. So thank you for that reflective, meditative, contemplative piece, Dr. Jiva. And I'm going to come back with our questions. We'll move now to Emily, Dr. Emily Silverman, an alum of GTU. She received her MD from Harvard but her PhD from the Graduate Theological Union in Interdisciplinary Studies of Religion, studied under Rosemary Radford Ruther. She's currently the Vice President of Programming for American Academy of Religion Western Region, and she serves on the ARSBL Women's Caucus. She was ordained Queneth Emanuela from the Hebrew Priestess Institute. Her main academic focus is on feminist theologies of spiritual resistance. She is the co-editor with another alum, Whitney Bowman, as well as Dirk Wanderhost, for Voices of Feminist Liberation, Writings in Celebration of Rosemary Radford Ruther. I'm going to ask her to state the name of her piece, of her presentation, because I might not get it right, but I will try. Kohenet, Hebrew Priestess, Netivot, Archetypes and Spiritual Ways as an Ethical Path for a Sustainable Society. Emily, take it away.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. I want to thank you for inviting me to talk here in a discourse that I'm new to, the eco discourse. And I want to say to my colleague, Dr. before me, a Ramadan Kareem, may it be an easy fast coming up. And I come from the Ramatush Olani lands, which is here in San Francisco. I am Dr. Emily Layer Silverman with one hat, and I am a Kohenet, a Hebrew priestess on the other path. I just was recently ordained this summer in this pathway, and most of my academic work has actually been on the Jewish Holocaust, or the Shoah, and religious vision, and Jewish women. And I grew up around Holocaust survivors, so thinking about survival has been a big part of my life, survival, and how do you resist, and how do you do tikkun olam, make it a better world. And so what I'm going to do today is talk about, from two hats, both from being a practicing Hebrew priestess and from being an academic. I'm going to look at our pathways, our spiritual pathways, and then give you an example of one of our priestesses who is doing a phenomenal job in climate change action. So, anyway, I would like to dedicate this talk to the first woman rabbi who I spent a lot of time working on in my Rabbi New, dedicated to the memory of the first woman rabbi, Regina Jonas, who died in Auschwitz in 1944. Regina Jonas is considered Em Haderek, which means mother of the path for a Hebrew priestess. She served as a rabbi in the Theresienstadt concentration camp and brought the Shekhinah, which is the feminine divine, or mean indwelling, to her people through her teachings of acts of love and compassion. She had this she left this in the archives of Theresienstadt that she taught her people. Our Jewish people has been defined in history by God. To be blessed by God means to bless, to do good, and be loyal to others wherever one goes and in every situation. Selfless, devoted love to his creatures preserves the world. Now, this is what she told her people in the Theresienstadt concentration camp. She knew, and I think most of them knew, that they weren't going to make it, but she gave them hope. And I always am blown away by this quote of hers, or this teaching, because it shows that why are we chosen and blessed? We're blessed to do mitzvot. We're blessed to do acts of compassion, and that selfless, devoted love or acts of compassion to his creatures, meaning not just humans, but all creature preserves of the world. So I dedicate this talk to her. My outline of my talk is I wanted to write a book when I was told about this talk. I wanted to write a book from the ashes of the Shoah to Kohenet. So what is a Kohenet? What are the netivot, the spiritual pathways? How do these netivot embrace an ethical practice and for earth-based ecological consciousness? And I'm going to be lifting out 3 netivot, in particular looking at the work of Kohenet Re'abolah, her priestess named Weaver of Prophecies, and she embodies the pathways of the midwife, the weaver, and the prophetess in her Climate Ribbon project. Kohenet is a Hebrew priestess. She's a spiritual leader. She was who has been ordained by the Hebrew Priestess Institute. The Hebrew Priestess Institute was founded in 2006 by Rabbi Jill Chea and Tea Masher. It offers a 3-year ordination training program. There are over 100 Kohenot and 50 rising Kohenot, and we reclaim ancient Israelite and Jewish women's spiritual and ritual practices. We've been subjugated, which these voices have been subjugated for over 2,000 years, and it embraces the earth and cosmos through the embodiment of the divine Shekhinah.
We are Kohenet. We are Hebrew priestesses. We celebrate the sacred in the body, the earth, and the cosmos. We hold the world to be an embodiment of Shekhinah, the divine presence.
We reclaim the traditions of women.
From the priestesses and prophetesses of biblical time
to healers, dreamers, and seekers throughout Jewish tradition.
We create ritual as a transformative force
in Jewish and human life. We practice spiritual leadership
as an act of holding sacred space, time, and soul. We honor divinity as she appears to us
in female forms through our traditions, imaginings,
prayers,
dreams,
ancestors, and teachers.
We are a clergy training program,
a sisterhood,
and a movement,
changing the face of Jewish leadership.
We need you, priestessing.
So Kohenet, we are priestesses and we are facilitators of the connection between worlds. We tend to relationships between humans and divine. We do this through ritual. We do this through dimensions of sanctuary space, through trance and prophecy, through creation. And we spend 2 years studying and training in the 13 different pathways. The term Kohenet originates from the word priest. If you have Jewish friends, you might have heard the last name Cohen, and their lineages or ancestry, probably it's even on DNA, go all the way back to the priestly tribe. The first known words of Kohenet were written in Phoenician, and then we have some inscriptions back, tracing back to 800 BCE. But more importantly, it's very hard, those of you who have studied comparative religion, to translate some religious concepts into another language. So archetype is actually not really the best word. It's a sort of stagnant. We're very fluid. Netivah is found in the Torah, our holy scrolls, and it comes from Proverbs 3:18 to 17. It means pathway. And to those of you who are Jewish in the audience and practice, you might know this verse. When we return the holy scrolls to the ark, we say, "She is a tree of life to them who hold fast of it, and through them who grasp her, whoever holds fast to it are happy. Her ways are ways of pleasant ones, and all her netivot, netivea, are peaceful." We see that the Torah itself is viewed imagery as a tree of life, and her pathways lead to wholeness. And Judaism itself is an ancient tradition going back at least 3,000 years, and it was always on a lunar calendar, and it was always our agrarian tradition. So what are the Pistis pathways? I'm not going to read them all here, but I'm just going to lift out for time what I'm going to focus on. There's the weaver. The weaver pathway shows the reverence for the web of life, and her path is one of showing the interdependence of everything. There is the prophetess I'm going to be lifting up. She's mode of revelations. She shows us what is hidden, and she speaks truth to power. And then there's the midwife, who's a holy transformer. She holds liminal space for those that are dying or those that are birthing, and also holds space for grief. So we're going to look at the work of Kohenet Ray Abullah, whose priestess name is Weaver of Prophecies. And she weaves many different social justice actions together and artistic projects. And she shows the interdependentness of it all. And one of the big projects that she's done, and she's taken it to the world religions, is the Climate Ribbon Project, which asks a very important question of people. What do you love and hope to never lose to climate chaos? This project asks people to take individual and collective responsibility for climate change by acknowledging their grief. They write their sense of loss on a ribbon, tying it to a tree. Then another person comes to the tree and picks a ribbon, which they then tie on their wrist and take an oath to protect the other person's loss. It links people around the world. This is a form of eco-elegy being put into a positive transformation.
What do you love and hope to never lose to climate chaos? Take a moment and reflect on this question.
So I think the question, what do we love and don't want to lose to climate chaos? I think it really gets to the heart of something in that all of us have something to lose in this.
And then I had to take time to reflect on it myself and think about what I wanted to share, because there's so much is at stake, and climate change could affect so much, and so much of that is precious.
And it's very personal as well. I asked people to think specifically about their relationship to climate.
Now that you've held this question in your heart, write it on a ribbon and add it to the tree.
The smell of wet grass at dawn.
That tree that I planted in my grandma's yard when I was 4.
Being able to drink water from the tap. Big skies in the painted desert.
Rivers and streams, and the sound of water hitting the rocks.
I think it gives every individual, every single person, an opportunity to share their own story, to share their voice, which doesn't always feel easy and possible, but to share what it is that is important to them and why acting collectively is so important to them as well.
Find a ribbon on the tree that moves you. It can be a friend's or a stranger's. By tying that ribbon to your wrist, you are saying, I will be the protector of that which you most love and are most afraid of losing.
I just discovered this project, and it moved me a lot when I understood that it's only to put a ribbon on the tree, but it's also to share it.
That this is like just such a good way to do this. Maybe I will never meet this person in my life. You don't have to know someone in China, but we are connected forever now.
It's visual and it's interactive, but that it's helpful. So I'm going to take this back home, and I'm guessing that many of these classrooms are going to make their own trees now.
People can do this anywhere, and you can use an actual tree in your own neighborhood. You don't have to build one from scratch. And it doesn't even have to be a tree. It can be as simple as a string tied on a fence. The climate ribbon ritual can be done at any size, from something very small to something very grand.
So I've written for the happiness and safety of all people now and in the future, for all living things, and for the systems on which we depend.
May these ribbons be our roots to the earth and to each other. May they honor what we have lost and unite us in solidarity. May they help us weather the storm and move us to action.
So we can see here that this is a very powerful climate change action that puts individual responsibility and turns it into collective responsibility, and is a way of holding the radical space for the grief that might have been hidden that we feel, which I understand is a form of eco-elegy. We have a love of the earth, and so we don't want to lose. And she did a brilliant international action with this. And so, as I'm going to reemphasize again, so the ethics of the Weaver priestess, which is the interdependence of life, is the core truths which derive from the Weaver priestess. The Weaver only not weaves fabrics, but she is a master of weaving interconnectedness between everything on earth. These interconnections between people and the earth, between people and other species, between people and the cosmos. The weaver has to be queenly aware of what she is weaving and how she is weaving these interconnections. And we can see that Kohenet Ray is clearly doing that in this project. And then here she's the ethics of the midwife is shown in this project. The midwife is a holy transformer who holds liminal space for death and birth. She holds also the space for creation and guides people through major life transitions. So what this ribbon project is doing is it's asking people to think about their own grief, which might have been hidden to them, about what they have at stake, what is personally at stake for them in climate chaos. And then in a public forum, you're putting that on a ribbon and then you're tying it onto a tree, and then somebody else is taking it and it's interweaving us together. But what I really believe that when we're doing social justice actions is that we can't really move forward unless we acknowledge the grief and the oppression that has gone on. Without talking about the grief, without hearing each other, without hearing the other's grief, we cannot really move forward, which I think is the state of what this country is struggling with right now. And then as the prophetess, and all these, the prophetess, the midwife, are all, and the weaver are all in the Torah, and and the prophetess, she reveals what is hidden. And what I feel she's revealing that she is hidden is that in Ray's project is our grief. And the prophetess, and also we talk about Miriam, the prophetess, and it also can come through revelation, can come through dance, it can come through poetry, it can come through music and art. And as we see Kohenet Ray weave together our art with the social action justice. And then the prophetess is a visionary who not only speaks truth to power, but she can help us imagine or reimagine a better and just future. She gives people hope in the bleakest of times, and she shows them the way forward, which ties me back to Regina Jonas. When she knew they were all doomed, they were all going to end up in a gas chamber, she was still giving her people hope. She was like a prophetess, giving them hope that what we can do is be kind and compassionate to each other and recognize all our interdependence. There's a whole lot more I can say, but for the sake of time, I'm just giving you a little drop of honey of what Kohenet and what this part of Judaism, which follows in the line of ecofeminism and Jewish feminist spirituality, which has now been is being reclaimed and has been subjugated for the last 2,000 years, and now we're back, and there's already 100 of us ordained Kohenot down here, and I turned down rabbinical school to actually been waiting for Kohenot to come along. So I'm going to end here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. That was wonderful. It's wonderful and uplifting, and we should have, we should do a ribbon tree at GTU.
I'll help. I'll get Ray.
I will plan for it. Thank you so much. I'd like to now invite Dr. Cecilia Titizano from the University of San Francisco. Professor Titizano, a native of Bolivia, is also an alum of GTU and holds a PhD in philosophical theology from the Graduate Theological Union. She is a constructive comparative theologian, and she specializes in indigenous thought and Christian theology with an emphasis on Trinitarian pneumatology and feminist and liberationist theologies. Her transdisciplinary research focuses on indigenous philosophies and spiritualities, feminist epistemology, and of course, decoloniality studies, which ties it all together. She currently serves as a board member for Memoria Indigena, a Latin American organization dedicated to recognizing and remembering Indigenous Christians' memories, and is a member of Comunidad de Teólogas Indígenas del Vajrayana. Dr. Titizano's presentation is titled, If the Mama Pacha Could Talk, Andean Ethics of Living Well. Celia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'm just going to jump into the presentation I have prepared for this afternoon. So here we go. All right. So I was asked to think about the climate crisis and the COVID-19 virus and what is happening in our planet from the perspective of indigenous communities in the Andes region where I'm from. The best title I think for me was, If Mama Pacha Could Talk, If Mother Could Talk, What Would that mean? So here, as I started the presentation, I want to make sure I clarify some terms. The first one is I'm using Indian cosmology. By Indian, I am kind of bringing together two very large population, which will be the Quechua communities and the Aymara communities that live in what is now Peru and Bolivia, and they've been living there for thousands of years. Also, the way I'm using the term cosmology is as a synonymous with a speculative philosophy in its most comprehensive sense. Another term that is very important to the presentation is Mama Pacha. Perhaps many of you are familiar with the term Pachamama as Mother Earth. I'm making a differentiation. Mama Pacha is the mother or lady of all there is. Mama means lady, mother, and Pacha, which is term an Aymara and Quechua term, refers to existence in his full, in everything that exists. So perhaps the easiest way to translate it could be as all that is. In that sense, Mama Pacha is the creative matrix, the constant advance and flow that makes the process of becoming possible. She is the creator and creation itself. She is God, so to speak. Pachamama is the most tangible expression of Mama Pacha in its creation form. She is the body of God, and she is God. So how do we understand reality then? What we see, how we make sense of what exists? In the Indian communities, we could say that the Indian family is a cosmic community that includes the ancestors, the protective spirits, plants, animals, rivers, rocks, the whole of creation. all family members are called to become Haki Runa, meaning being in relation, a being in relation. Here is very important to mention that because it is all members of this cosmic community, Haki Runa does not refer to humans only. Humans are part of this family, yet there are other members of this family, and that existence and personhood can only be obtained by being in relation. So therefore, being Haki Runa implies precisely that, and is applied to everything that exists, because everything is alive. In this sense, what do many Haki Runas do as they exist in relation? Well, they converse and they teach one another. They nurse life in their they let life nurse them. What do I mean by that? This is very, very important for Indian ethics. It is the whole, we could say the Pacha is like the whole, when the runas, the shalkas, which is all living beings, the wakas, which is expressions of the divine, interrelate in the process of nurturing, coming from nutrir in Spanish, which is nutrients, and living. So living requires nurturing, and nurturing regenerates living in all its dimensions. Therefore, as a community of beings, as a community where everybody is invited to become the fullness of being by interrelation and working together and love in a way, not necessarily loving each other, I would say more, but caring for each other. The whole of Pacha is not a creature. It is a living and relational community of beings. Then how does that we make sense of what has happened with the pandemic and with the climate crisis? Well, both are seen and are being experienced as products of this equilibrium, created by a human community that has forgotten their place and role in Pacha. And here to cause this equilibrium, it means to cause a breakdown in harmony, an imbalance that takes place at the communal level with cosmic consequences. So you are not going to find that direct cause effect in this system of thought. Here there are multiple causes, and therefore even an individual behavior that produces this breakdown in harmony has cosmic consequences and affects all of us. We as humans are Mama Pacha's youngest children, and we ought to respect and show gratitude to our mother, our elder relatives, like the plants, the river, the animals, the mountains. Yet we have forgotten. How did we forget? From Aymara and Quechua communities and many other indigenous communities across the Abyayala continent, which is the term used by the Guna people who live in Panama for this continent, is the fullness of the earth. This equilibrium began in a stronger sense with colonization and its upstream coloniality. Colonization racialized and dehumanized indigenous communities, placing them among nature. To decolonialize indigenous people lack rationality. Their metaphysics, consistent of narratives about the origin of the cosmos, what it means to exist, ontology, and how we relate to one another, ethics, were denied. Instead, what it was imposed was an eromodernity of a metaphysics of the one, favoring substance over relations. And this metaphysics of the one was supported by a chain of being that privileged humans over the rest of the cosmic community. Therefore, Mama Pacha, Pachamama, was raped. All of her other than human children were erased from real existence. And we end up with one world, one ontology, and one voracious capitalist economic system. Everything is alive, we say it in the Andes. Everything has awareness, volition, memory, and spirit. Therefore, how are they entering this conversation with around the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, the COVID-19 virus is seen as a relative, perhaps not a very loved relative, perhaps a relative that they wish not to be present, but the reality is that it exists. Therefore, it has life, it has a spirit, it has will, and it has memory. This is why Quechua and Aymaras have respectfully welcomed the virus among their midst. Why is that? Because the virus has a function to play. This is not to say that they disregard science, but respectfully and carefully relate to the virus and acknowledge the devastation that the virus brings, while taking the right measures to minimize its effects. However, within the states in which the Aymara and Quechua community lives, they did not necessarily take this very well. There was within the first responses and as the policies were created, indigenous communities were not consulted. And when they engaged, they reacted differently in a way that makes sense within their own communities. They were accused of being primitive. So we still racism and it is still very, very present. Yet they keep reminding us that we are all cuerpos tierra, we are earth bodies. All of us share the same materiality and life energy. Whatever we do to the earth, we do it to ourselves. Here is important also to bring that there isn't this differentiation of a human as a separate something that exists over against concepts of creation. We are all part of the same reality. Therefore, we need to move beyond the culture and nature divide, which was created within the Aeromodernity project. Because by keeping to enforce that division, we are making them invisible other than human persons. You may ask, but who are these people? Who are you talking about? In Quechua, they call them tiracunas, or earth beings, as Marisol de la Cadena translate them. But what does it mean to say that they have real experience? For that, I'm gonna have to go to Indian cosmology. And here, I'm just gonna focus on one of the final steps of creation, of how we came to be. I wanna call your attention to these spirals here. This one here is called Sumapa, Supa, which means the supreme couple, because the divinity in among Indian communities, it is understood as male and female, not necessarily being gendered. It's just there's this difference, this complementary difference. And because there is this relationship with this difference, is that which, by engaging in that relationship, is that creation or pacha, which is the second one here, the second spiral here, came to be. And that's what you have here. Therefore, if relationship is that which established entity or beingness, and that beingness is shared by everybody, therefore, pacha, everything that exists, has a very radical ontology, relational ontology here. This is extremely important because by requiring relationship in order to constitute beingness, and that beingness also meaning that has life, all existence is equal. There is not a difference between what is human and what is not, what is alive and what is not, because we are all the same. It's within this framework that we move and we say that tiracunas or earthings are persons. They are persons because they have membership and participation in an actual network of social and moral relationships and practices. And because they are in a relationship, then they can they can really exist. They can become haki or runas. And they can also have this life in spirit. Therefore, moral agency is at the core of Aymara and Quechua understanding of personhood. Therefore, here the connection is that the disequilibrium that we are living, the climate crisis that we are experiencing, that is only going to get worse, can be addressed and needs to be understood as a way of breaking these relationships and seeing how Indian ethics transforms that and saying that because we are all in this together and we are all children of Mama Pacha, therefore that relationality is important and honoring each other is extremely important. I'm going to say this again, moral agency is at the core of Aymara and Quechua understanding of personhood. A human in isolation makes no sense. They call it as it's still a male or female, but it's not really a person. Personhood happens when they come into this dual complementarity, this opposite dual complementarity. So these are some good questions. What would happen if we listen to Mama Pacha? What would happen if we open ourselves to the possibility of a radical relational ontology? What would happen if we open ourselves to the existence of earthings? And here is the term summa kamanya. Usually it's translated as living well. Humans and non-humans are called to embody summa kamanya in Aymara and summa causai in Quechua. Summa means fullness, kamanya means living. So it's a fullness of living or a fullness of life. And living, and it usually is translated as living well. And I just want to highlight here that living well is almost the opposite of living better. As members of this Pacha, we are all being called to live well, to practice a harmonic relationships with all that exists, to live in equilibrium, in justice and peace. How that would look like then? That whatever we hope for ourselves, for our loved ones, we also wish it upon other beings. Therefore, we only take what we need with gratitude and respect. For the daisy of a worm have the same rights to live their life in the fullness. And because they are persons, therefore, we find like in the Bolivian and in the Ecuadorian state constitutions, the Mama Pacha, Pachamama is a person with rights. And I just want to highlight that in the US, the only other personhood that is recognized as having rights are corporations. Living well and respecting the personhood of everything that exists translates in an embodied and political spirituality. It is a way of life. Together, all Haki Runa, criamos, nurture life. And we transformed our understanding to become to imagine a bioverse when life is at the center of it, promoting and embodied interconnected ways of being, of knowing and doing. This is what in the Indian is called a cosmovivencia. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think we can all say that we learned so much from you. And I have questions, but I want to open up the floor to everyone. And we actually now, we have time, right, Devin?
Yes, we have about 25 minutes left.
Good. We've been running up against the time wall through all our sessions. And so I'm delighted that we actually have time for a conversation, especially between us. And anyone from the attendees who'd like to send a question, please do. But I have too many, so I'm going to first let others go forward. Devin, do you want to start, please?
I'd be honored to. Thanks to all of you for very uplifting presentations. A lot of the thematics, of course, for our day are quite heavy. The double burden of climate calamity and COVID-19, and in a lot of the presentations in this panel in particular, there's very specific localized religious practices, doings that are transformative and restorative. So I'm glad we ended on this note. I don't know if that was deliberate on Dr. Sharma's part, but it's been lovely. I have a general question that comes out of my friend and colleague, Dr. Jiwa's presentation, which I really loved. And Munir had a turn of phrase in there about how the humanities have been an essential service of sorts during COVID-19, providing this critical sort of ethic for our moment. And I would invite everyone or anyone on the panel to offer some reflections on actually the great existential crisis COVID has foisted on the work we do as scholars of religion, that under the pretense of austerity measures, sort of the ongoing effects of neoliberalism in the academy have been decimating for a lot of religious studies and theology departments across the country. I'm thinking in particular of the University of Vermont, if any of you have followed what's happening right there with their humanities and religion programs. So what is one to do about that? And I say that also very leery of the pressure put on our own work to do a kind of writing or thinking that is different, that it would be better if we shut our books and put down our pens and went out and affected something given the calamity of the moment. I'm thinking of our colleague, Dr. Molobita's urgency she brought to the second opening plenary session about how we're in a 5-year moment. It's sort of the make or break it moment with climate change. What is to be done? So I'm interested in how we negotiate boundaries between the academy and other places of religious belonging and religious identity, and sort of the challenge of our time where COVID-19, which has been the great revealer of all kinds of injustices, has also been devastating for the humanities and the work the humanities embody. So maybe some of you who've been preoccupied this and are also connected to spaces outside the academy might have some words to say about where we might be in 5-10 years' time, given what's unfolding. So that's one bigger question I've had from today, but made acute by my colleagues' remarks about this work right now at this time.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about something that has concerned me. We are familiar with the statistics, but students, young people, teenagers entering college are experiencing very high levels of depression, anxiety. Many of them come pre-medicated to college, a staggering percentage nationally. And what concerns me is they're entering a world where all they hear about is chaos. that are entering a world where they don't have a cosmology that gives them any certainty or gives them any hope. And part of what we've been able to do with the development of our Master of Arts in Yoga Studies is to provide a depth training for at least a little tiny percentage of the millions and millions of people that practice yoga on a regular basis, to do the full circle, to give them a meaning structure that explains to them why they feel reassured in their yoga practice and how this is not disconnected from their psychological state nor from the ills of the greater society. So I think that humanities has always been a public endeavor, and that it's our job as educators to provide the safety. And I don't mean that in sort of the millennial way, like, oh, you hurt my feelings type of thing, but that we as educators can provide solace and meaning. And it doesn't need to be restricted to the humanities. You know, I mean, so many of them are going into health-related fields, and that really can't be disaggregated from the humanities in the most fundamental ways. So anyway, I'd like to just sort of offer that as one small response to this really large question that you've raised very elegantly.
If I could follow up, it is quite connected. I've seen the same thing with my students at USF. In one of the courses that I teach is called Ethics in the Indigenous Religious Traditions. And what I've noticed is as we enter and precisely being able to engage these other cosmologies, these indigenous cosmologies as philosophies, then therefore we are, in those classes, students are experiencing other ways to reimagine reality and other ways in which we could organize our societies. And through some practices that we also do there, I've seen them, the level of anxiety going down a little bit, because I'm very concerned about the youth as well. We are not giving them a lot of options. We need to start imagining a world that looks like very different. And for that, we need a world with many little worlds, so to speak, in the sense that we need to challenge the assumptions of how reality is constructed. And also I want to connect that with the second part of the question, is that as a scholar, from having coming from Latin America and having an indigenous ancestry, what we are doing is open spaces where their voices can be heard on their own terms, and no longer let them be pushed to the side as beliefs. They're beautiful beliefs, they have beautiful wisdom, but they're never really true knowledges that can guide us into how we imagine what comes next. So I think we still have a very important function to play, but we also need to have that connection with the actual work that a lot of indigenous communities, in my case, they're doing in Latin America, which is most where the activism and the fights and the policies like the one I described, they were able to reshape a state constitutions. Now, whether or not they're working, that's a very different example, but we got to that place, and now we have to keep struggling to keep it and trying to make it work. I will stop there.
Cecilia, I'd like to ask you a quick question. When you describe Summa Quamania, it was very complex. I mean, it's a sophisticated framework. Is that your own contextual construction, or is it something that is actually functional within the communities? And if it's already functional within the communities, one of the things I'd like you to talk about a little bit, since we're talking about the humanities, and you and I have discussed this, that the loss of the material knowledge, in other words, the loss of the epistemic structure? Where are the texts, the writings, the rituals, the loss of all of this? And how do you elicit this information and these cosmovisions, you know,
No, it's not a term that I created. It is at least 5,000 years old term. And it's very much practiced, and it's very much now present in the politics, especially in Bolivia and in Ecuador, where the indigenous communities have a very strong presence, political presence. How we are going about this, and it is an alliance with the colonial thought. And we are expanding in a way how we understand what a text is. And I can give you a very good example here. When I started this project many years ago and I presented as a possibility for dissertation, one of the reactions I got is, but indigenous spiritualities are they're not really a religion. So therefore you cannot have a religion, you need a text. And the answer was, yeah, we do have texts, and our texts are weavings, and our texts are oral history, and our texts are celebrations of life. And the text is the way people live. So what we have been working on is by expanding how we understand texts. Therefore, communities that are still practicing this way of life, which is very much outside, and bringing groups of women and men and asking that question, and for them themselves figure out how are they practicing, how much is being lost. It's been an ongoing process. And there, for example, in La Paz, there is the TOA, which is taller de historia oral, where through that, the remembering and retelling the stories, it's a way of doing so. There are also museums created by indigenous peoples who are reclaiming textiles as a way of creating new texts. So this opened a whole level, broadening up. Part of my work, for example, is done through language and also mathematics. So there.
Thank you so much. I have a long conversation with you about this one of these days. Munir, would you mind talking a little bit about that article in Inside Higher Ed on humanities?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question and for the responses so far. You know, it was a piece called Humanities as Essential Services, and it was Professor Kirsten Oster from Rice University, who works in the medical humanities, trying to, I shared it in the chat, so if you have a chance to look at it later, but in terms of what she's trying to say is that in a time of crisis, you know, and the kind of complex challenges, to use her words, like global pandemics, she says we need a collaborative response that transcends disciplinary boundaries and offers novel approaches to vexing problems. And so I know a lot of her work is done in public health and kind of bringing together the humanities with public health and the kind of learning that can happen, you know, what she says in terms of transdisciplinary understanding. So, you know, part of our education, part of our learning has to be across these disciplines. And as colleagues have already shared, multiple ways in which we understand people's life worlds at the same time, the particularities of people's life worlds, and yet what is shared, you know, what we share, right? So I think it's a kind of push towards that. And it's interesting, some of the responses that I've had, whether in class and beyond, in doing work with you know, colleagues and friends in public health. My own background, I have a little bit of you know, work that I did as an anthropologist in medical anthropology and narrative medicine. And so what we often see is that, you know, when you're in the health field, and an example I'm always challenged by my colleagues and friends in other fields is that if you're a caregiver, if you're a doctor, you don't get to discriminate on who you help. That's in the realm of ideas, our discrimination and our daily practices. But in some fields, you don't have that. You make you take vows, to protect all. And I've had to really learn from that. Can we, for example, speak with people whose ideas are radically different from our own? It's a very, very difficult thing to do in academia. We have very few, for example, alt-right, Republican, sometimes they don't necessarily all go together, so I don't want to lump people together, but we've had a lot of conversations, for example, in classes around anti-vaxxers. And why is it coming from evangelical communities? And how is that tied to white supremacy? And how is it tied? We need to be able to have those conversations. And it's very difficult to do it because often we want to keep a lot of these people at a distance. At the same time, they inform how we think about the world. And again, we are connected. We have a responsibility to ourselves and the other. So I often, I'm reminded by again, folks on the front lines to say that we help whoever it is. We don't look at your political stance on things. We don't look at your background. We are there just to help. And that's what we do. And so we can't discriminate and we won't discriminate. It's a very different thing to say, to be able to do that in academia or in classrooms, So in some ways, the conversation around the humanities is really also a push to seeing what the humanities has to offer other disciplines, but also what other disciplines has to offer us in our work and in terms of growing that boundary and enlarging it and being able to have these conversations even when it's very difficult.
If I could add on to that just very briefly, he's no longer with us, but John Grimm earlier today gave a fantastic presentation on the Indigenous Humanities. And I think it would be appropriate to recall sort of the history of how that as a cognate in the university is over-determined with the secular in a certain kind of way. So if we're working in religious studies or theology or religious practice, the project of the humanities as being this atomized singular self, that it's the heart of how we interpret culture or literature or whatever. If we turn to other spaces, indigenous traditions, non-Christian theologies, there might be ways of belonging that are moving outside of that atomizing of a singular self. So I'm glad we got the higher ed article, but I wonder if all of us here doing the work we do might want to think about how, in context of climate change, we need to supplement that base episteme of the humanities as a project, which privileges this sort of, or universalizes something that's often been held by white men exclusively as a historical subject. And I'm thinking of, Emily's fantastic presentation. I didn't know about this very moving story of the first Hebrew priestess in the camps, and that ethos of love and being in community in the most abject circumstances. That kind of being together, that seems important.
May I? She's actually, I don't know if she herself. This is what my dissertation and my first book was on her. And my rabbi knew her, and I served on a board with people who were students, and she died there. But she was actually ordained as the first woman rabbi in Central Europe. She was ordained in 1935 in Offenburg, Germany. And I don't know how she would. I started with her because that's where I come from. That's the work I do. Is I grew up surrounded by Holocaust survivors, and my own relatives were survivors. And I was almost going to do a presentation on like Viktor Frankl and Regina Jonas, because Viktor Frankl and Regina Jonas served in Theresienstadt together under the pastoral care, Soulsager, care of the soul. And I don't know if Regina Jonas would call herself, she calls herself a woman rabbi, but I'm looking back at her and naming her as a priestess. So the priestess tradition, some of it is textual, and as Cecilia was saying, a lot of us is centric around text, humanities is centered around text. And being Jewish, we're a very text-based tradition, but you have to ask, like, how did we become a text-based tradition? Well, in the West, when we were oppressed and locked in ghettos and we couldn't own land or anything, what we did to elevate the males, this is my theory, is that we had academies that studied text, and we became very disembodied and very good at text, and we sort of get like the Nobel Prizes and stuff like that because we're such a text-centered tradition. Also, when I studied world traditions, it was so apparent to me outside of Islam that we were one of the few traditions that did not have anything embodied with a deity or anything. So, but Rabbi Regina Jonas, or Rabbinerin Regina Jonas, needs to be known, and so I named her as one of the priestesses. But our tradition, our lineage that we're bringing back, goes back to archaeology, goes back to like parchments, goes back to weavings that are about 2,000-3,000 years ago. So, and we are putting it together. There are some of the other spiritual paths that we don't have in the Torah, but that are outside. And usually the Torah, it's like you have to ask who's writing it. Who's writing this, one of the biggest pieces of ancient Near Eastern literature. So it's not the women that are writing it, and especially in Deuteronomies, where they're trying to blot out the Asherah, which is one of the manifestations of the Hebrew goddess, is that whoever was writing that was trying to blot out the shamanesses. We have a path of the shaman, and so. So what we're doing now, and actually the founder of us talked yesterday here at the GTU, Rabbi Jill Hammer. She was at Chide yesterday talking. And what we're doing is we're reclaiming what Cecilia, what has been lost to Judaism for 2,000 years. We have been lost. And I grew up, everyone thinking I would be a rabbi before there was major women rabbis. Everybody thinks that the first woman rabbi was ordained in 1973. But actually the first woman rabbi ordained in Ashkenazi is in Central Europe. And Judaism is so diverse. We have, Middle Eastern Jews. My sister-in-law is from Mumbai, an Indian Jew, and we have African Jews, and we're very diverse people. But what ties us all together is our way of life. And it's Islam is probably the closest to our practices overlap, in the sense that it's a way of life. Judaism is not, religion is an imposed Western canon notion of being bound to God that sort of goes back to the old way of sort of thinking of putting it outside. But when you're living by a calendar, you're figuring out your food is dictated, your crops are dictated, it's all a way of life. And I think that we have to center, as a liberation theologian and feminist liberation theologian, we have to take back and stop centering text and look at a broader definition of text that Cecilia was talking for. And I think if young people could study, when I'm in the classroom, I'm very interested in knowing about my students' lives and what makes them tick. And I have practices. I make them do sacred and profane. I make them read Musa Eliad, and I said, what in your life is sacred and what is profane? Is going for a run a sacred part of your day? Is preparing a meal a sacred part of your day? You have to make it practical. This is why I brought in Ray. And Judaism is all about tikkun olam, which is making it a better world. We're co-creators with the divine and making it a better world. We have work to do. So we don't have monastic traditions in Judaism. But anyway, I can talk a lot, so I'll be quiet now.
It's interesting that, when Emily brought this up, I was just thinking, Devin, that Cecilia and Emily are both reclaiming epistemologies of things. So it's a material epistemology of visual and material culture. That's what's going on. And oral culture too. So the oral traditions are so important in these areas. And I think that we're getting to that point now because we have such a strong emphasis on material studies and visual culture studies, that the very existence of everything from, labyrinths to sculptures, to all manner of things that tell us what we need to know if we can only listen. Anyway, we have run out of time. That was such